we are living in far from good times, but we are lucky to always have literature, poetry, performed stories to keep our spirit alive. And so how perfect is it then that we're beginning tonight's reading with Ukrainian American writer Irene Zabytko. And Irene, I apologize if I did not, I looked up how to say your name, your last name. I hope I'm kind of got it.
You did. You did.
Okay. Yeah, and I just want to read bio. Irene was born and raised in the Ukrainian village section of Chicago. She is the author of The Sky Unwashed, a novel about Chernobyl and the evacuees who returned to their irradiated villages. Wow. It was a Barnes and Noble Discover a Great New Writers book and a New England Booksellers Association Discovery title. The ebook version was rated #1 on Amazon.com and appeared on the New York Times bestseller ebooks list. She is also the author of the short story collection When Luba Leaves Home, which is based on the Ukrainian community in Chicago. One of the stories, Obligation, won the Penn Syndicated Fiction Award and was read on the National Public Radio's The Sound of Writing. It was also selected as the New York City Public Library's best books. She was awarded a Fulbright Scholar, bless you. She was awarded a Fulbright, bless you. You just muted. That was, I have to always remember to mute as well. Okay. She was awarded a Fulbright U.S. Scholar Award to Ukraine, where she was researching Ukrainian-based haunts of the Ukrainian 19th century writer Nikolai Gogol for an upcoming novel. Her newest book is another collection of Ukrainian-themed short stories, The Days of Miracle and Wonder. Please give a warm welcome to Irene Zabytko. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be amongst my Chicago cohorts. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Ignatius, wherever you are, for the invitation. And I'm just honored to be here. I'm not in Chicago anymore, but I'm always a Chicagoan. I'm also always a Ukrainian. And I just wanted to give a special shout out to my colleagues and friends and family in Ukraine as well, but certainly in the Ukrainian village where I did grow up and still have a strong connection with. And as you know, there's a war going on in Ukraine. And actually, I was going to read from my latest novel, The Days of Miracle and Wonder. And there's a lot of miraculous things going on in Ukraine right now as you see the resilience of the Ukrainian people. Every day, we hear stories about how they are standing up for their country, for their identity, for their independence. And I think we all feel that we're on their side. But I'm also very concerned about what is also happening as a war crime in Ukraine. There are many war crimes going on right now. But in particular, again, we're hearing about shelling at nuclear power plants. There was one recently, I think even yesterday, in Kharkiv, which is the second largest city in Ukraine. The Russians are shelling nuclear power plants, which is not only a war crime, it is a disaster, not only for Ukrainians, but for the world. So I think instead of reading from my latest collection of short stories, which are about Ukrainians, post-Soviet Ukrainians in particular, I'm going to go back to my first novel, which is about Chernobyl, called The Sky Unwashed. And I'm choosing this because of Chernobyl is again under siege. It is being occupied by Russian troops. They have shelled Chernobyl. They kept workers there as hostages. So it's still a world concern, as is the war in Ukraine right now. So I'm going to read from my novel, The Sky Unwashed, which came out in 2000, and I still think is very relevant. And it's based on a true story about a group of villagers. There are many villages around the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl proper. And many people were evacuated like a week afterwards, after the nuclear explosion in 1986. But many had returned to the irradiated villages, especially around the 32-kilometer nuclear power plant zone called the exclusion zone. They weren't supposed to be there, but they had nowhere to go. And these were older women in particular who returned because they had nowhere to go. And that's what my story is about. What I'm going to do, I'm going to start out with the title, The Sky Unwashed, which comes from a poem by another Ukrainian, 19th century poet, the national poet of Ukraine, Taras Shevchenko, who was also persecuted by Russians during the Russian Empire days. He was a serf, managed to get his freedom, was very prolific as a poet. His big crime was writing in Ukrainian as opposed to Russian. He was also a visual artist and a brilliant singer and had a lot of talents, and was accused of insurrection and inciting the Little Russians, which were what Ukrainians were called during the Russian Empire days. So when I wrote my novel, The Sky Unwashed, I love this poem because of the metaphor, the sky unwashed, and the blackening of the skies from Chernobyl. And I think it's relevant today because of the blackening of the skies with the bombs going off in Ukraine, even as we speak. So I'm going to read the poem that I translated from the original Ukrainian by Taras Shevchenko, 1848. And it's called The Sky Unwashed. And the sky is unwashed and the waves are sleeping. And beyond the shore, far, far away, the reeds, as though drunk, sway without wind. Merciful Lord, how much longer do I have in this open prison, this useless sea, this tedious world? It doesn't speak. Silent and bent as if alive, the steps, yellowed grasses, won't tell the truth. And there's no one else to ask. So what I selected to read tonight is a very short prologue, the setting, a village that I called Study Lease, outside of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Again, there were many villages there, and before it was a nuclear power plant, it was a very pastoral, serene area. And I named the village Study Lease, a conglomeration of the villages in that area that I know very well. I've been to Ukraine many times. I have relatives there. I've been to Chernobyl many times as well. And so I was very familiar with the terrain. And I named it Study Lease Old Forest because that's where people decided to remain for centuries in on their ancestral lands, which is what the Ukrainians are trying to do now. So here is the prologue. It's very short. And it's just the setting for the calmness before the Chernobyl nuclear explosion on April 26, 1986. In the village of Study Lease, during the less politically oppressive days of the Gorbachev era in the Soviet Union, the citizens working on the kolkhoz, the collective farm, felt themselves to be more prosperous than their counterparts in the cities of Ukraine. The cow's milk was sweet and creamy because the animals were allowed to roam the fertile grasslands. From a distance, fleshy black cows dotted the crisp hayfields where they ate the tender and abundant lemongrass and clover. Near the fields, wild red-orange poppies grew defiantly between the giant stalks of sunflowers. Old men chewed tobacco and sunflower seeds during harvest time so as not to set fire to the dry, igloo-shaped bundles of hay with their homemade cigarettes, while strong, overworked women tended the cows and ran the tractors alongside their men. When they weren't too busy with the farm work, the women still made traditional jam from Queen Anne's lace, a golden paste they spread on generous slices of soft brown breads, often baked in the huge outdoor clay ovens their ancestors had fired for over 100 years. The old men and women were clearly in charge of the kolkhoz because of the stubbornness they inherited from their serf forebears. They insisted on harboring pieces of the land for their own small gardens. The government reluctantly allowed each of them 1/3 of an acre of property. So the villagers' thatched roofed houses stood on these modest patches of cleared forest land, surrounded by neat gardens of potatoes, beets, tomatoes, and pretty ornamental flowers that the older women grew to adorn the altar in the church.
Mal?
A few families even managed to build tiny sheds on the corners of their crowded lots, which they used to smoke pork or to hide a still or to shelter a cow. In the fall, the old women gathered huge succulent white mushrooms and strung and dried the feathery caps into amber curls that would sell to the highest or loudest bidder on Saturday mornings at the local bazaars. But the old farmers' children weren't so stubborn. They preferred to seek the better wages at the nuclear power plant in nearby Chernobyl. There, the gray cement modern buildings were a monument to the Soviet promise of progress. Everyone knew that if you could last 5 years doing whatever work they gave you, you were eligible to apply for a short family vacation at the plant's residence in the resort town of Sochi on the Black Sea. 10 years on the job got you a booklet of coupons that permitted you to shop at the Kashtan, the stores that were only for tourists and hard currency, or for Communist Party officials. At the Kashtan, you could buy transistor radios and mock Oriental rugs, sometimes sexy ivory nylon blouses from East Germany or ice pink lipsticks from Poland would come in unexpectedly and be bought up in minutes before the next surprise product appeared without warning on the shelves. Until their names came up on the interminable waiting list for the ever-crowded, dour blocks of Stalinesque apartments closest to the Chernobyl plant, this new generation lived in study lease with their parents and grandparents. Together, the generations mingled, fought, and survived in the cramped village cottages because, for the meantime, they had no place else to go. They rebuilt the roofs, especially the thatched ones, which always needed repair after a hard winter, or pulled their monthly wages to buy a new cow or a new kind of television without the horizontal lines that defaced the screen whenever anyone was trying to watch a news program or a rock concert direct from Moscow. The more affluent families of study lease could even afford a car, a Volga or Lada, usually black and sturdy, complete with a diesel engine that could blow the dust on the country roads even further than a tractor could. What the younger villagers of study lease wanted most was to bring some material comfort into their hard, barren lives. Years of empty communist promises had led to apathy and disillusionment and made them hunger for the tangible possessions they thought would soothe their frustrated spirits. For their part, the older generation, the ones who had survived Stalin, famine, and war, and especially the babusi, the old women and babushkas who kept the old ways alive with their icons and litanies, despite the official ban on religion, knew that the hard times would never end. In 1986, Paraskevia Volodymyryevna told the other babusi of study lease that the storks had not returned to nest on her thatched roof. This had happened only twice before during her lifetime. In 1933, at the height of Stalin's artificial famine, and in 1944, when the Germans invaded the village. A bad sign, Paraskevia told anyone passing her house who would listen. But Paraskevia shook her head. Maybe they'll come yet, many said to appease the old woman. She said no. The storks had always returned just when the long, thick icicles under the eaves melted and dripped like a death knell to announce the end of winter. By the time the first crocuses opened their sassy yellow petals and the buds on the naked trees were about to green and swell, the storks should already have been settled into their wide nests. A bad sign, Paraskevia repeated to herself. She made the sign of the cross and expected something to happen. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Irene. That was awesome. So visceral. Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your work, and especially at this moment when we are all thinking of Ukraine, often, even here in the US. Wow. So, well, it's my pleasure to introduce our next reader, Gerald Brennan, or Jerry, as you might know him. He's the author of 5 space books, including Infinite Blues and the forthcoming Alone on the Moon, which led one Blorbus to dub him the poet laureate of the desolation of space. His writing has appeared in the Chicago Tribune and New City, who also named him to its Lit 50 list of people who book in Chicago. He's also the founder of Tortoise Books, which Rick Kogan of Chicago Tribune and WGN radio fame recently called one of the best, most provocative and rewarding publishing houses in the entire country. And he's also just an all-around incredibly nice guy. So please welcome Jerry.
Jazz hands. Thank you, everybody. It's really great to see all of you. I had a bit of a dilemma because my new book is coming out in 2 months, so it's like a little bit of time interval. And the new one is about the Soviet Union landing on the moon, so it's kind of like a Soviet glory type thing. And the old one is about World War III starting in space. So it was kind of a little bit of a dilemma what to read, but I did a Twitter poll and the old book won out. So I'm gonna read from Infinite Blues. I wrote this in part, they say you kind of discover what the book is about when you're working on it. And part of it was to make sense of Trumpism in the US, which was, obviously a disturbing phenomenon to a lot of us, one that we're still trying to sneak our way out from. And reading and researching for this, I saw a lot of the seeds of it in Goldwater and in the mid 60s, a lot of the kind of willful thumbing your nose at the press kind of thing. And as much as we like to pretend that Trump is an aberration, he does represent a strain of, unlikable strain, but very American strain of bullying and authoritarianism. So anyway, the section that I'm reading from this book is so in this book. It's kind of an alternate universe 1960s where MacArthur was president rather than Eisenhower, and the US is kind of struggling to come out of this quasi-fascist reign here. And Nixon was MacArthur's vice president and then later president. So this is this is Richard Nixon at a football game in 1968 after his one term as president. So, a football game, late November, blue LA sky up high, low fog rolling in from the Pacific. On the gridiron, a tangle of bodies, gold pants and helmets on both sides, dark red jerseys on one, pale blue on the other. Crowd noise crescendoing after major plays for one side or the other, for this stadium is home to both, and then returning to a dull ocean roar. The president is smiling, relaxed, clean teeth emerging from the famous jowly cheeks. Around him in the stands, a handful of men, also in suits, some dividing their attention between the action and the crowd. A reporter comes down the steps from the press booth, notepad tucked under his arm. When he is abreast of the chief executive, he stops as if to plan his approach, so focused on the famous faces that it takes him a second to notice the anonymous one right in front of him. "Can I help you, sir?" the lead agent yells over the noise. "We wanted to see if the president had changed his mind about press availability. We're curious to hear his thoughts on the incoming administration." A few seats down, Nixon glances over, distracted finally from the action on the field. The smile disappears, dark, angry eyes. The agent glances back, catches the look. The president is here to watch the football game, sir. Nixon turns back to the field, takes a sip from a thermos, shudders, relaxes. They do really like to bother you, sir, his chief of staff says. Everything that's happened these past few months, it's all their fault. And they're still trying to blame it on you. I don't blame you for not wanting to talk to them. It'll be over soon enough, thank God. UCLA has the ball near the goal line, a succession of pounding short runs, and then at last on 4th and goal, a sweep around the right to score. Another eager sip from the thermos. There's a guilty feeling, though, to be walking away from it all. The president glances back at the lonely reporter who is still trudging back up the stairs. You know, in another life, that could have been me. A reporter? A sports writer. I'm sure I told you I was awful on the field. 2 left feet. But I'll tell you the lessons. How to take a pounding and hang in there. How to keep going, never quit. My parents named me after Richard the Lionhearted, you know. Again, he drinks, words liquid and loose. I knew early on I would never be good on the gridiron. The other guys were 20 pounds heavier than me, but I hung in there. And still, even now, there's something about just being around the game. He appears relaxed, but the smile hasn't returned. Eyes distant now, wistful. In another life, I could have been a sports writer, just chronicling it all. I might have been happier as a sports writer, but there is that call to be in the arena. USC is driving now, steadily chewing up the field, feebly resisted by the ineffectual blue shirts. Did you ever think of coaching, sir? I mean, the action on the field, it's not a closed system. Coaches are part of it too. I couldn't do that. How can you tell someone to do something you can't do yourself? My coach, the chief, he was a hell of a guy. All-American here at USC. He could tell us what to do because he'd been there. I think that's what made me want to be in the arena myself. Just seeing that, a man who could speak with authority because he'd been there. That's what I loved about MacArthur. That's what the people loved. He'd been there, a tough act to follow. You have a lot to be proud of, sir. I'm sure the new administration will end up saying the same about you. You can't help but wonder. Another drink, another shudder. I was ready to go to war over Berlin. I was. And thank God they backed down. But I don't know, maybe I lost my nerve too. Czechoslovakia, maybe I should have been tougher. But you know, it's different when you're the one making the call. MacArthur, for all the tough talk during the election about losing China, arming Chiang Kai-shek to retake it, when he was in office, it was, again, he drinks. He had people urging him to attack. When Beria took over, we had all those squabbles over the Chinese islands. And I was one of those people. But once I was in office, drinks again. It's different when it's you, when it's all on you. When you're in uniform and things go south, you can always blame it on the man upstairs. But when you're that man, the chief of staff nods, possibly understanding, possibly acknowledging that he will never understand. Anyway, MacArthur, he was a man immune to pressure. On the field, a lovely little run by USC, number 32. The crowd around them roars. So too does the president. Quite a run, that man. Quite a run. Yes, sir. Next play, 2nd and 4, number 32 plunges in, battered by collisions, but he falls forward, picks up a few hard-earned yards. He is something, isn't he? Even on a short play, he falls the right way. Really something. He certainly is, sir. He had that run last year, 64 yards to tie it up, set up the win. I remember watching that on TV and thinking, what a hell of a run. He's a lock for the Heisman this year. He is. But last year, that game, my God, I wish I could have caught that game. Number 32 again. With a little leap, he darts deftly through a hole in the lines. And by the time the sky blue jerseys close in, he is plunging across the goal line. 13-10 USC. The crowd roars, surges, feet stomping on stands, rolls of toilet paper flying through the air. The chief of staff shakes his head. Tough break for you guys, the president says. You're taking sides, sir? Every politician has to eventually. If I cheer with you and Haldeman, I get the cold shoulder from Pat, and I see the chief in my mind shaking his head at me. Down on the field, fresh-faced cheerleaders are hopping and clapping. Cheerful, clean-cut prep squad types, clad in white, are pumping their fists. Extra point, good. This energy, it's really something, isn't it? It is, sir. You know, this is America's national pastime, not baseball. We don't want to admit it, though. How do you figure, sir? We're a violent nation, an energetic nation, born of violence. Most other countries, their origin stories are so boring they're lost to history. Some group of people started living and fucking in the same patch of earth for centuries, so long that they started speaking the same language. But no, not us. Born of violence and rebellion, reborn through civil war. It's who we are. There's violence in baseball, but it's incidental. Two outfielders bumping into one another while fielding a fly. A collision at home plate now and then. It's possible to make it through a whole game without resorting to physical force. And it's a lazy game. No clock, no sense of urgency. More important for South America, maybe. You can take a siesta while you wait for your turn at bat. Again, the president drinks. We're violent, but we're ashamed of it. On the field, UCLA tries helplessly to make a final drive before the half runs out. A few rows down, a supporter catches the president's eye. Nixon smiles, waves, points an acknowledging finger. Caesar in the Coliseum, his chief of staff smiles. Except I won't be Caesar much longer. Still no smile. There were legal options available, sir. I fought, I tried to fight, I never quit. There still are options, sir. There still are options. And you're still president, sir. I am still president. He surveys the field. The final seconds of the half tick down. The players depart. The USC marching band takes the field. The crowd is part of it too, you know. They want it to be violent. They want the spectacle, bloodlust. All of the Caesars understood that. They understood the need. The crowds weren't observers, they were participants, voting up or down, decisions of life or death. And maybe here too, the players, they want to see that someone's watching. Proud parents cheering them on, a young girl hoping for a date. They feel that, they feed off that energy. They hit harder when there's a crowd. The crowds cheer the hard hits and the players hit harder. The president wobbles, possibly drunk. The crowd is always a part of it. They pretend otherwise, but they're a part of it. They were part of it when Jesus was crucified, when I lost the nomination. Another mournful drink. The chief of staff looks over at him. Observation, no judgment. Maybe I wasn't hitting hard enough for them, the president continues. My parents were Quakers. I'm sure some of that rubbed off. Maybe I wasn't hitting hard enough, but I can hit hard. The president leans into the chief of staff, speaks in low tones. He nods toward another aide, only a few seats away, one in uniform with a leather briefcase attached to his wrist. People talk about Caesar. Caesar had nothing by comparison. I could go under the stands with my aide. I could go under the stands, and in half an hour, 100 million people would be dead. The chief of staff says nothing. The president wobbles ever so slightly. Out on the field, the USC marching band lines up with military precision. A rank on the 15-yard line, a rank on the 10, a rank on the 5, a rank on the goal line. Uniforms red, gleaming brass instruments. They step off with a blast of energetic horns. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I love your work. I mean, you go big. I don't think I would ever have the courage to, write from that point of view, but you always pull it off. And I also loved the back and forth between the, more the conversation and then the larger football, and then your writing about, violence in America, and also just your thoughts on the difference between the Roman Empire and ours. So very nice, very, very, very nice.
And there's a celebrity cameo in that you probably didn't pick up.
Oh, what was that? Sorry.
if you know who number 32 was on USC. But,
Well, see, that is something I would never know. Maybe somebody else picked it up, but I was like, no, sorry. You're talking to the wrong person. And I also wanted to mention to Irene that I think everyone I know is horrified by what's going on in Ukraine. And because it is horrifying, and we all support you, and we all are in solidarity with you. And so thank you so much for sharing your beautiful, beautiful prose. I feel like I know Ukraine in a way I didn't before, and just very appreciated. But please know we all have spent this last month just in horror, feeling horror, and we're with you. So thanks very much to both of you. And now I get the honor of introducing Natanya Rosenfeld. And Natanya is a writer, independent scholar, and professor emerita of English at Knox College. She has published 2 books of poetry, The Blue Bed, and in 2021, and Wild Domestic, Sheep Meadow Press, 2015, as well as a scholarly book, Outsiders Together, Virginia and Leonard Woolf, Princeton, 2000. And each hat book, she and I, appeared in 2018 from Essay Press. Her essays, poems, and fiction have appeared in journals, including Agni, the Yale Review, Gettysburg Review, Michigan Quarterly Review, Southwest Review, and 4 essays have been listed as notable in Best American Essays collections. Beret, a poem published in Yale Review, received special mention in the 2020 Pushcart Prize Anthology. In 2018, she was named one of 30 writers to watch by the Guild Literary Complex in Chicago. You can learn more at natanyarosenfeld.com. And I just want to add that I've always been aware of Natanya's poetry and scholarship in Chicago. And one of the many reasons we're so happy to have her with us tonight. So warm welcome to Natanya.
That's so nice to hear, Natalia. Thank you.
It's true.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I will start with 2 poems from my first book of poems, Wild Domestic, which has this wonderful painting by Chaim Soutine, my favorite 20th century painter. And this first one is called All She Remembered, and it's dedicated to my grandmother, Bertha Rosenfeld, whose dates were 1904 to 1991. All she remembered. Look, this is all I can tell you. I was sick the whole time on the boat. I didn't know where I was going. My father was a man in a picture, first with a beard, then later without. His face didn't tell me anything about him or about my new mother and 2 strange sisters. I was 17. I made 2 friends on the way, but we parted and I never heard from them. I think one went to Wyoming. Imagine, Wyoming. Some people kept kosher on the ship and arrived skin and bone. I never cared enough to sacrifice my health. To be honest, my belief is not deep. I know if we honor his commandments, God is supposed to care for us, but I always believed what I could see. The first night on Ellis Island, I dreamt of my mother. You know that she died giving birth to me. I never saw her or heard her voice singing. That night, she came to me. She wore a long white dress, and her red hair shone down to her waist, the way young women wore their hair until they married and had to shave it off or cover it. She said to me, in Yiddish, of course, "Tochter, it will be all right." So I believed her. What choice did I have? Either it would be all right or it wouldn't. Better to believe it would. May she rest in peace. The Statue of Liberty, I don't remember. I know my friends tried to make me look when we were coming into port, but I could only worry about what lay ahead. I'd traveled across Russia. It was a bad time, a dangerous time, a girl by herself to the port in Riga, and I wasn't afraid. But all I remember from my arrival is fear. This is a prose poem. Admonitions. I saw a shining dark blue bird on the grass, unable to move. I bent and saw its neck was choked in a band, the head turned wrong way round. I put my hands around the bird and was able to pick her up and unwrap the noose. Instantly, her head turned around the right way and grew normal sized, and she flew free. "How can we atone?" they chanted. "Revive all the birds you murdered," I said. They took slingshots, held them up, tried to coax the stones back in, but the stones lay mute and unmoving yards away on the barren ground. "You see," they said, "there's nothing to be done." Then I said, "I will take away your book of birds." And I took it and wound it in wire so that it could never again be opened. If they needed to identify the remaining bird species, they would have to find a new language. They say the god entered her in the form of a bird. I say change the old stories to new ones. Say that he was the sky and she was the bird, and he cradled and carried her. Say that he was the pond and she was the stork and drank from him. Say that he was the tree and she pecked at his bark and was fed deeply. Even say that she lost herself in the maze of his twigs. Only don't say that he entered her in the form of a bird. If I could dictate the laws, I would make it against the law to say that. Okay, now I'll read from the Blue Bed. And this first poem, I think my guess is that Chicagoans will know the sculpture in the Art Institute to which, or which inspired this poem. It's called Sacrificial. The ram waits to intervene. One is always needed, for somewhere, everywhere, there is a father with a knife over his child, or a mother sharp-tongued, quick to hit. If only every bush held a ram, patiently entangled, head bowed for the cut. In the museum, I gaze at one from Rome, mouth in a firm line like an old man's, resigned, horn circling the labile, downturned tongue ear, facing the altar. I quail, then think, better you than me. This is in the Blue Bed. In the Blue Bed, I lay with my friend, her head against mine, her sadness in my ear. Her pulse beat hard. I said what I could. I lay with my man. Our bare bodies said, I attend. Our blood whispered, don't depart from me. I lay sick and troubled, blue quilt to my chin. A violin moaned. Life is a storm, said the bow to the strings. We long and long. We bruise our throats and cut fingers to coax arias from wood. On cobalt fields, at last I dozed. Lie down, my loves. Hold me. Watch the sails unfurling. Fill. Lake efforts. This also is a Chicago poem. The The scene it describes took place during the pandemic when I would go to the lake almost every day. Lake efforts. Last week, a boy lobbed stones. Each time he threw, he turned with a shout to the girl. I'm sorry, let me start over. Lake efforts. Last week, a boy lobbed stones. Each time he threw, he turned with a shout, but the grown-ups weren't listening. He chose bigger stones and bigger, turning every time. They sat laughing, deep in talk and drink. What would it take to disturb them? A boulder? And how would he find, lift and heave a boulder? Audience must be given, boy. It can't be won. This, at my age, in our age, I know. Aboriginal. I went to the ocean. The ocean was churning with filth. I went to the shore. The shore was carpeted in bones. I went to the mountain. There were corpses on its peak. I went to the lake and looked down, down, down. At the bottom of the lake was a fish. The fish was God and blew bubbles. I made a long spear from many arrows put together. I impaled God. I put God on a fire made from the broken arrows. As he roasted, he spoke. Here's what you must do, he said. After you eat me, you must walk up the mountain. You must pluck down the skulls. You must go to the ocean. You must take a great net and collect the filth. You must spread it carefully and plant my bones. Then he said, and here is the hardest part. You must go to the shore. You must sit down and wait for the wave. When it comes, you must not budge. You must let the tsunami take you away. If you do this, a new fish will come, but only if you sing my song while the wave drags you under and you are gasping for breath. And here is my song, said the fish. I will tell it to you while you eat me. Woman and dog in waning light. Snow's fallen, we're off to the park. I slip on the slick sidewalk. You trot with nose up, glancing bright-eyed, inquiring at my face. I don't know, little one. Purblind, I'm with you on the voyage. You dash when I release you, return at my call. Every day, this is a wonder. All week I've leafed in the book of Ice Age art, your head in the crook of my arm. Here are man beasts, bison with thick, thin legs, and women, massive, boulder-thighed, sack-breasted, clefts ineluctable as the first apple. Without you, my Alabama hound, I'd know nothing past my own nose tip. Might look up, not down, might hear bird song, not whisperings underfoot, not voice of leaves, scent of leaves, twinkling of leaves, flashing, smell of leaf mold, smell of others. I need you to tune me to the world of blood and pulse and exhalation, mud and root, chaser and prey. 3 millennia ago, fathom that. A child and wolf found ingress to this cave. See here the little footmarks, the paw pads in a circle. Blood-red handprints shrilled when they came. I was here. Farther in, sinuous antlers, flanks, tusks like grass in wind, undulant, shining, menacing, muscles flaring, flexing, a presence, a protection, so the two must have felt. Strangest yet, this bison's head above a woman's mound. The child paused to clean her torch and stayed some time. After her departure, rubble filled the mouth again, until just recently, following a sniff of air, 3 hominids crawled in. On a shimmering screen, we see what they saw. Outcrops, limbs, and members thrusting forward, dark grass in storm. Now, walls everywhere flutter, massless. Even at the end, they'll flicker. I'll hold you as long as I can. Thank you.
Oh my God, Natanya, I'm like blown away. That's just amazing.
Well,
I love,
there's this little
every line.
advantage to being the only poet in the group, right? And being in the middle, but thank you.
No, that was really lovely. Thank you so much. I can't wait to read them again. And now I have your voice in my head. Yeah, really lovely. Thank you so much. Well, I am delighted to introduce our next reader, Archie Jam John. Is it Jam John, right? Is that?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. And Archie is the co-curator for Outspoken LGBTQ Stories at Sidetrack. He is also a two-time winner of the Moth Grand Slam in Chicago. His writing has been published by Barrel House, The Rumpus, and the Coachella Review. He is also a team member of Story Jam in Chicago and has been a featured teller at the National Storytelling Network. He's an MFA in creative writing from Roosevelt University. And when I've seen Archie perform before, I've just been thrilled and delighted. So we're really happy to have you here on Zoom. So please help me in welcoming Archie.
Hi, everyone. I'm the curator for Outspoken. Our next show is April 5th. If you're in Chicago, it's at Sidetrack at 7 o'clock. In keeping with my outspokenness, I'm going to do two stories about coming out or my queer experience. All right. Are you talking about me? Bundit asked. Yeah, my friend Jane replied. We're talking about you. Jane had been talking about Bundit to me. I wouldn't have dared to. Bundit pointed at me. No, I want to hear it from Archie. I shook from the inside. At 13, I knew to live in fear of older males, and I knew that at any time they could hurt me, inside or out, with words and actions. I avoided them, and I'd only sat near Bundit because I thought the presence of Jane would keep him tame. Jane was just telling me that, Archie, do you even know what people say about you? As if I didn't know. Just tell me something, Archie. Archie, you're straight, right? I nodded my head furiously, and Jane even said, see, Bundit, he's nodding his head furiously. So you like girls, Bundit asked? You want pussy? I continued to nod. You're a liar. You would suck my dick right now if I'd let you. I didn't realize I should stop nodding, and Bundit broke out into laughter so loud our Sunday school teacher had to shush us. Jane told Bundit he was disgusting and grabbed me by the arm because I was just gonna keep sitting there, and she was smart, like Darlene from Roseanne. So she let us out of the room. He's such a jerk, Jane said, but I already knew that. I just felt stupid. I just could never find the words. The summer before that, during the first day of Sunday school, Danny walked in to my class and I fell in love. He was all Pacific Sunwear with floppy hair. He held onto a skateboard and I wanted to be that skateboard. Within 2 weeks, I had persuaded my mom that I needed new clothes. I started listening to Nirvana, and Danny was teaching me how to skateboard in the temple's parking lot. I may have been 12, but I had game. I was a failure at skateboarding, but my friendship with Danny blossomed over Street Fighter II. Danny was always Ryu and I was always Chun-Li. And for every Shahrukh he would send into my chest, I would lift my skirt and pummel him with a round of tornado kicks. We were so good. We were so good that when Danny's parents hosted a Christmas party for the temple kids, I, as Chun-Li, beat Bundit and all his underlings for several rounds. Bundit set a bowl of popcorn flying, and I was relieved when Danny beat me and took my controller. An hour later, it was time for Secret Santa, and I was so excited because it was my first Secret Santa. I grabbed my present and looked at the card. My name had been scratched out, and the word fag had been written. Someone was trying to break me in front of everyone. I crumpled the card and pushed it deep into my pocket. I opened the present and pretended to be delighted by a bottle of CK1. A couple months later, Danny and I were walking out of the men's bathroom at Temple while Bundit and company were walking in. Oh, look, it's Danny and his girlfriend. I blinked again, but Danny opened his mouth. You guys are stupid. Danny, Bundit started, you're stupid if you can't see that Archie is in love with you. Look at him. He dresses like you. He's got your shoes on. He's been on you since you got here. Archie has a girlfriend, Danny insisted. And it was true. I had a girlfriend at American school. I don't care if Archie has a girlfriend. He's in love with you. And since you don't seem to mind, you must be a faggot too. We walked off that day, but after that, Danny knew the truth. By the time summer came around again, Bundit was dating Danny's sister, and when Danny walked into class, he would sit on the other side of the room. During break, he was doing handshakes, shooting hoops, and other dude things with Bundit and company. He became one of their underlings, and he even ignored me when I scored the winning goal at that year's soccer tournament. None of the boys acknowledged my goal. I stood in the field and almost thought it hadn't happened until Jane ran up with a smile and asked, "Who the fuck are you?" That was so many moons ago. Sometime during college, I Facebook friended Danny. I mean, I get it. Belonging feels good. And also, I find it hard to stay mad at sexy people. But once in a while, when Thai people gather, I'll run into Bundit or one of his former underlings. They look old. They have dad hair and pot bellies. They drive overpriced sedans and look perpetually ready to play golf. I know I'm supposed to be a bigger person and reply with more than one word when they ask me how I am, but I don't want to. I don't want to until they say, oh, hey, by the way, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if something I said or did when you were young made you feel like I don't exist or I didn't have a right to exist. Because I have a great gift for them. Something it took me years to unwrap and rewrap and that I didn't even know I needed myself. Forgiveness. Second story is called Like a Geisha. In 2012, American Idol singer Fantasia Barrino sang, "Sometimes you gotta lose to win again." And I was like, duh, because I'd gone to college and met Tommy. In September of 1997, I moved into the Pencil Avenue dorms at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. That evening, around 6 p.m., our RA Raj convened us in the lobby and told us what to expect our freshman year, claiming we would go from boys to men. I gave Tommy the once over because he was a fellow Asian, Korean, I suspected, and looked like a combination of innocence and trouble. His hair was a matted mess. His clothing was thrift store and Abercrombie and Fitch. On our floor, the first floor, all the boys, including myself, were either environmental science or engineering majors. That's the proudest my parents have ever been of me. But that evening, as I slumped into a plastic chair, I rolled my eyes at everyone because I was miserable. I was a thrift store chic, urban brat suddenly surrounded by cornfields and science. Why had my parents banished me to Central Illinois to sort out a career? The only thing I cared about was my cat, figure skating, and Madonna. The first weekend we were free from our parents, I watched Tommy come back from a night out, stumble down the hallway, and pass out in front of his door. With his baseball cap twisted and covering his eyes, I felt a twinge I would now call desire. Having been sheltered by my parents' fear of white people and their tendencies to engage in fun, I found Tommy's state alluring, even dangerous. I nudged Tommy, but he didn't move. I shook him harder, and he vomited. Looking back, that moment was like Cupid launching an arrow into my closeted heart. And the next weekend, I was mixing clothes from both our wardrobes and trying to fix his hair. While the other boys were content with cans of Budweiser and video games, I mean, I don't want to judge anyone, but I'm just better than that. And Tommy could see that as well. At the first house party Tommy took me to, I downed 7 blue motherfucker shots in half an hour, leading me to urinate a lot and anywhere. I met a girl from Japan. I told her I spoke Japanese, and then I began listing sushi items in a Japanese accent, like California maki and spicy tuna roll. Because even though I'm Asian American, I'm American first, which means I'm fluent in asshole. That night started a semester of nights I barely remember. Over the next few weeks, Tommy and I became so close that even though both of us were straight, people assumed we were boyfriends. This might have been because at parties, we never left each other's side and shared cigarettes and drinks. It might also have been the crop tops I wore while touching up Tommy's hair, or the way I made him dance with me to the Spice Girls. It might have been some of those things to some people, but as far as the truth goes, it was because I was madly in love and happiest when we would accidentally fall asleep together. Once upon a time, I was a little boy who felt gay feelings, but could always push them aside. But the urge to hold Tommy's hand and make out with him made this increasingly difficult. When we were drunk, I could feel myself starting to aim for his lips, but my fears always sobered me up. When we were on winter break, however, we found ourselves in my parents' basement, a room stained with my high school sexual pursuits, a couple of which involved other people. As a child, the basement had also been my secret figure skating rink, where I reproduced the performances of Christy Yamaguchi, Tanya Harding, but mostly Surya Bonali. While I was showing Tommy how to do a double axel, I fell on top of him. We laughed and I found that my hand had landed under Tommy's shirt. I lifted his shirt slowly, kissed Tommy's belly button, and gazed into his face, ready to do more. "What the fuck?" Tommy screamed. He was kind of serious, kind of disturbed, and to my surprise, genuinely surprised. I sprung up and laughed it off, but when we returned to school the next month, there was doubt and silence. 2 weeks into the spring semester, Tommy met a blonde named Kathy, and of course, I was supposed to be happy because that's what friends do. But like a tiger in a cage, I paced my dorm room wondering what to do with myself without Tommy. But here's the thing about cages. You're trapped, but you can see through the bars what you really want. And I could no longer deny what I wanted: dick. And having the dick owner say no instead of myself opened a door, specifically a closet door. From the ashes of falling in love with my straight best friend rose a Gaysian, a twinkie, hairless penis hunter who would try to infect the gays of Central Illinois with yellow fever. And because my coming out coincided with the advent of online dating, I became a human squirrel gathering nuts for a long, hard winter. I would go from quiet and sheltered to horny and indiscriminate. I'd take that model minority myth on a midnight trip to the bathhouse. And while I don't think that's what my R.A. Raj meant when he said we would go from boys to men, my parents were much more disappointed when I went from environmental science to English literature. Thank you, everyone.
Archie, that was fantastic. And I have to say, like, very compelling, because I think you bring out the loneliness and the confusion. You're already, you're young, and it's already hard to be young. And then you have these assholes basically really making your life hard. And so no, I think I would have waited for an apology too before I said anything, come on. And I love how you're like in Central Illinois, surrounded by cornfields, and it's just so not, it can't be good for you, it can't be your place. But just so well done. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure. Yes. Our final reader is Leslie Kirk Campbell. And Leslie Kirk Campbell's debut short story collection, The Man with 8 Pairs of Legs, Saraband Books, won the 2020 Mary McCarthy Prize for short fiction. Her award-winning stories have appeared in Arts and Letters, Briarcliff Review, Southern Indiana Review, and the Thomas Wolfe Review. The title story was published in Plowshares, Solos in 2021. Campbell, the author of Journey into Motherhood, Riverhood Press, has received writing fellowships from Playa and UCross. An Illinois resident for half her childhood, she currently splits her time between her ohana in Honolulu and her ohana in San Francisco, where she teaches at Ripe Fruit Writing, a creative writing program that she founded in 1991. Her next collection, Free Radicals, is in the making. And I'm just going to add that those are two great addresses to have, Hawaii and San Francisco. I would do either one of those. So it's such a pleasure to have you, Leslie. And again, thanks for being here. And the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you to the whole Sunday Salon Chicago team and to Turi Writer for leading me to you.
Yes,
And,
thank you, Turi. Thank
and
you.
to all the other writers who read. My own ancestors on my mother's side are from the Ukraine, and to Udessa, Jewish Ukrainians who escaped persecution from that part of the world. And so I do have, Irene, that the heart connection through the blood, as well as what, everyone, whether they're Ukrainian or not, feels. It's particularly horrific to see a war televised. They said the revolution shall not be televised, and to be sitting and actually watching it happen. It almost like everyone, I'm sure, is like, we all got to do something. I mean, it's just hard. So I'm going to read, so this is my collection, The Man with 8 Pairs of Legs. This came out in February from Saraband Books. And I'm going to be reading the beginning of the second story in the collection, which is called Thunder in Illinois. Mr. Evans, who still loves Mrs. Evans, has thought up a dozen ways to leave her. Some literal, like lifting off in a Hughes 500-piece stealth helicopter from their tar-spun roof in rural Bradley. Some figurative, like disappearing into the pages of a John le Carré novel, exhaling honeyed tobacco on the cruel sands of a British beach. On this June morning, however, Mr. Evans, still robust at 62, sits across from a field of corn on the back porch of the house Mrs. Evans inherited from her parents, and has a revelation. Every year, this same fallow field valiantly shoots up stalks and crowns them with a profusion of golden tassels, only to lie strafed each winter. Death, he decides, is his only way out. He certainly doesn't have the courage to take his own life. But after yesterday's test results, his white blood cell count is rapidly climbing. He is able to picture himself happily buried at the intersection of hobby and Brookmont, free, finally, of corrupt financial schemes, ill-fated Southeast Asian infrastructure projects, airplane food, and most importantly, love and the manic duplicity of it. But not until he wins the word game with Mrs. Evans. Mrs. Evans is a 4th grade teacher who thrives on winning games, including one she makes up. One might say it is her métier. She'll stop at the Union 76 on her way home from Kankakee Elementary, and if the black numbers at the gas pump don't line up perfectly when she releases the trigger, say with an even $40, not a penny more or less, she tries again for 41. Sometimes gas leaks onto her shoes. The true contest, though, the one Mrs. Evans has come to enjoy the most, is playing Bali, a word game with Mr. Evans. 2 decks of lettered cards packed into a small red and blue box she unearthed on a liquidation table at Sears, a contest that ramped up considerably in the 80s when the couple were in their 40s and their 3 wayward children had left Bradley. Mr. and Mrs. Evans had given a joint sigh of relief. They could be alone at last to play the game, which they did almost every Saturday night, or Friday if they had a party to go to, or a bridge game set up for Saturday. The years went by. Mr. Evans's widowed father, a cattle rancher, died in a senior home in Nebraska. Mrs. Evans's immigrant parents, haberdasher and housewife, were fleshless by now in their Waldheim graves. The Bali scores are cumulative. Mrs. Evans has always been in the lead, though there have been times when they were neck and neck for weeks. Then Mrs. Evans would put down a game stopper like quixotic or xenophobia. By the mid-90s, each of their scores had surpassed the 1 million mark. Tonight, the stakes are high. If Mr. Evans is to die with even a modicum of self-respect, he must finally pull ahead. While Mrs. Evans clears the supper dishes, Mr. Evans sets up the game on the same teak table they've had since 1959. The last few Saturdays, he has won. He is catching up. To start, they each pull a card from the face-down deck. Mr. Evans gets the letter B, Mrs. Evans the letter K. A good sign. Every game has its element of luck, and Mr. Evans is lucky. He will be the dealer. He will go first. I can die, he says. I'm a hair's breadth away. Mr. Evans is an aviation specialist, not a gambler, but just this morning, ruminating on the back porch, he had made his own bet. He hasn't told Mrs. Evans his numbers are skyrocketing or that the doctor gave him 6 months. Nor has he told her that Macondo, the Chicago-based Pan-Asian transportation firm where he's become a senior partner, is currently in the crosshairs of the International Trade Administration, the Thailand Board of Investment, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations for its alleged role in what is fast becoming an Asian currency crisis. What did you say, Lenny? I said I can die as soon as I get more points than you, dear. Mr. Evans has spent the entire afternoon imagining this unlikely victory. Tonight, he will lie on his side of their king-size bed, and Mrs. Evans, trounced for the first time, will be quiet, the room almost peaceful. His blood cells will be free to procreate like rabbits in his bone marrow. Mrs. Evans is attractive, even when she scowls. She doesn't know he's not joking. She looks at her fingernails, which she has polished with clear lacquer. Mr. Evans feels like a scoundrel, which feels good. Dying, it turns out, gives him an advantage. Perhaps he doesn't need to actually win the game. Perhaps by this simple proposition, linking his death to his score, he has already won. That's absurd, she says, pushing a few short curls off her forehead. He feels it too, even in shorts and open shirt, the heat left over from the day. Her face looks dour. He notices a slight crookedness in her once starlit looks. Susan Hayward, he used to say. Elizabeth Taylor, she still insists. There's an unexpected softness in her jowl that moves him. On every shelf, tucked away in every niche, are the miniature ceramic pots Mrs. Evans has collected when Mr. Evans allows her to accompany him on business trips to Manila or Bangkok. You're not gonna die, Lenny, she says with her signature wry smile, the one that usually defeats him. Mr. Evans focuses on the 14 cards laid out on the table. 2 horizontal rows, 7 facing her and 7 facing him. Each card has a big black letter on it, and each letter is worth 0 to 4 points. He can use any of these cards to make a word as long as it can be found in the Oxford Dictionary and starts with a letter in his row. He can also steal a word from Mrs. Evans. Her lace, for example, could be placed on his P, just waiting there in his row. Mr. Evans feels heady tonight, quickly seeing over a dozen words he could make, all with decent scores. The fluffed up Persian brushes his calf, turning her uppity behind in his direction, apparently desiring a rub. He pats her on the head. Her claws shoot out and she whacks at his leg, drawing 2 faint lines of blood. Do something, Mrs. Evans says, growing impatient. She gets up to retrieve the red plastic egg timer from the spice rack and turns it on its head. The white sand sifts down. Mr. Evans puts a word on the table, a sweet word, a good word, lethargy, 64 points. Not bad, considering he had only 2 vowel cards to work with and is suffering from jet lag. He has only just returned from another business trip to Bangkok. But seconds after he deals replacement cards for the ones he's just used, Mrs. Evans slaps down sarcophagus, 77 points, keeping her lead. Mr. Evans's calf is still bleeding where the cat's claw cut deep. He studies the cards and sees the word rent, a lousy 12 points. He forages in his brain for a better choice, but encounters a recent memory of Vilai instead, still handsome in her 40s, bent over her sewing machine in the Surawang sewing shop he pays for. If only she were here. She would crouch on the carpet in her house slippers and apply Yasa Marn Fly with her expert hands, soothing him with her honeyed words, comforts he will miss. He glances at Mrs. Evans to see if she has noticed his reverie, but her eyes are on the cards. She is toying with her wedding band, slipping it on and off, already calculating her next play. Before she was Mrs. Evans, Mr. Evans brought his fraternity brothers with him to sing The Sweetheart of Sigma Chi to her below her second-story dorm window. He still wants to win her over. 24 years ago, flashy Mr. Matsuda, Mr. Evans's Japanese partner at Macondo, dubbed Prince of Patpong by the Americans due to his clout in Bangkok's red light district, cajoled Mr. Evans into meeting Vilai, a young bar girl at the Cosmos Club. It was 1973, the year the Thai government purchased and drained Nong Go Ho, Cobra Swamp, so they could build a new airport and make Bangkok an international hub. The king of Thailand had named the proposed airport Suvarnabhumi, meaning realm of gold. Mr. Evans and Mr. Matsuda were Macondo's advisors on the project, which, once built, would have the tallest freestanding control tower in the world. The beautiful Vilai, Mr. Matsuda had said, bowing as she stepped out from the cluster of Chiang Mai girls with her sullen eyes and her silky yellow dress. She leaned in close as if she knew Mr. Evans, her gold bracelets jangling, her skin sallow under the neon lights. Bashful with women, Mr. Evans blushed. She was 22, just a few years older than Mr. Evans's eldest. Vilai slid her hand into his and let him lead her into the busy street. Outside in the dusk, 2 grinning boys came up for air after a dive from a rickety bridge into the Klong, which smelled faintly of petroleum and rotting fish. After a sweltering day of sellers bargaining from their boats, the bittersweet scent of sun-drenched mangoes and durians still lingered. In spare English, Vilai explained to Mr. Evans that it was Loi Krathong, the annual Thai full moon celebration in honor of the Mother of Water. "You're a lucky man," she said. Hundreds of tiny floating baskets, each one shaped from a banana leaf and lit with a single candle, sailed up and down the Klong. Mr. Evans laughed with uncustomary ease, but all at once, Vilai stopped talking. The baskets had clustered along the Klong's borders, some invisible current pushing them against its walls. They skittered like manic water bugs. One by one, their flames went out. Thank you.
Wow, that was just wonderful, everyone. I want to thank Natanya, Jerry, Archie, Irene, and of course Leslie. I want to say also I apologize for coming in late. I just came here as quickly as I could from O'Hare. I was coming back from Philly from the AWP Writers Conference, representing all of you in the best way I possibly could as a writer myself. And Irene especially, I apologize for missing your reading. I promise to listen to the recording as closely as I can to your reading. So thank you everybody for just a beautiful evening. And what I'd like to do next is to lead us into the Q&A. We welcome you to stay, and the Q&A, of course, is anyone in the audience can ask the writers a question. It could be a question about craft, about themes, about anything in particular related to the readings that you think may or may not have a connection with anything else. I suppose that I could start off with a question to everybody, all the readers. And my question would be, let me just preface that by saying that the one thing that I found possibly common in all the readings is the sense of death and violence, and of course fear as well. And we understand that violence in its most tragic and visible way is quite physical, but also that violence can be silent, and it can be very effective when used in a silent way. So my question to all the readers this evening, to start off the Q&A, is to ask you, how do you